Welcome back to another episode of the Miami Heat Roundtable. I'm your host, Amir. I'm joined today by Martel. You can find him at the Miami Heat Zone podcast. And we have Trent. You can find him at the Miami Heat Network. And we have another special guest joining the program today. We have Wes Goldberg, the host of Locked On Heat. Thanks for joining us today, Wes.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. It's our pleasure. So, Wes, we have two important extensions looming in the next month. One of them is internal, obviously, with Jimmy Butler. The other is external with Donovan Mitchell. These two events will most likely dictate the direction that the Miami Heat will go this offseason. Some signs are indicating that Donovan Mitchell may sign his $200 million extension this summer and stay with the Cavs. And if that's the case, Wes, what do you think Miami's plan B should be this offseason? Like, what are some realistic, ideal trades that you think the Miami Heat should explore to help us compete in the East against the Celtics and whoever comes out of the West next year?
It's almost two different questions, isn't it? It's what can they do to improve the team, and could that improvement actually help them compete with the Celtics, with a reloaded 76ers team, with a healthier, better version of this Milwaukee Bucks team? And I don't know that if they don't get Donovan Mitchell, that is out there. I just don't know that option is out there. We could talk about Trae Young scenarios, whoever else it might be, but first of all, I have my doubts that Atlanta would ever trade Trae Young into the division, and that's just beyond before you even get to the point of whether or not Trae Young is that guy who could put them over the top, right? So there's a lot of different layers to that, and I just don't know what star is going to get moved that the Heat could realistically get. Paul George is not an option for them, right? He's going to either be a free agent or he's going to opt in. And if he's a free agent, the Heat don't have the cap space to sign him, and they can't negotiate a sign and trade because of how close they are to the second apron. So it's not an option. LeBron's not going. He's not leaving LA. Like let's forget about that pipe dream. And beyond that, I just don't really see it. I don't know who the player is. Like even if Minnesota, we're recording this Tuesday afternoon, a couple hours before the game 4 of Mavs Timberwolves. And if they do lose and Karl-Anthony Towns has another bad game and Minnesota decides to move on, all right, cool. Is Cat the guy that takes the Heat over the top? It doesn't really feel like it, right? Like the guy that just consistently comes up short in playoff moments. So to answer your question, I don't really know that option is there if Donovan Mitchell isn't that guy. The best you can hope for at that point is you get a better Jimmy Butler next year, that you get something done with the extension, you get a healthier, better version of Jimmy Butler in the regular season. You still get Bam Adebayo. You've got guys walking away potentially in Caleb Martin and Haywood Highsmith. Can you replace them with free agents or in the draft or however it might be? Can you find a way to maybe bring one of them back, perhaps? And you just hope for overall better health and for another run that's probably closer to the run that they had in 2023, and not so much being the number 1 seed the way they were in 2022, right? And that's probably where you're at.
Yep. And speaking of the playoffs, the common denominator across pretty much all the teams, well, not the Pacers, obviously, since they just were eliminated, was that all of them have functional size who could spread the floor. That Siakam, Turner on the Pacers, obviously Porzingis has been out, but still you have 2 6'4" guards. Jaylen Brown 6'6", 6'7", Tatum 6'8". You have Al Horford, and then obviously on the Dallas side, the two big pickups were Gafford and Washington, two guys that I'm sure us Heat fans wanted to potentially sign or trade for last season. And then, of course, the T-Wolves have Gobert and Naz Reid and Cat. So do you see a world where we could potentially trade, let's say, a Tyler, if he's not willing to be our sixth man, or a Terry Rozier even, to get two players that are on, deals around 12, 15 million and upgrade our size? And I know Bobby Portis is someone we've been linked to in the past, and obviously he's not available. He has, I think, a year left on his contract and then a player option, but he's someone who makes $12 million. Is there a way we can get him and whoever else on the Bucks for a Tyler? Like, would that help us, do you think, compete against the Boston Celtics next season?
I think it's something you have to explore, right? And now we're sort of getting into the moving around of the deck chairs instead of making that big upgrade. But I think, that kind of gets dismissed as a nothing. No, like moving around deck chairs, sometimes it's nice. It kind of changes the feng shui of the space, and everybody's a little bit happier. And all of a sudden, like sometimes that stuff does help, right? And I think that will be something that the Heat have to explore if they're not able to use the Tyler Hero or Terry Rozier contract or something like that in a Donovan Mitchell trade. What can you do to maybe, to your point, split up that contract? get some size, create some versatility on a roster that I thought was overrated in terms of its versatility. I think we confuse versatility with a lack of specialized talent sometimes. And you could do that. And also to the point that I made before, like you've got two role players probably leaving in free agency in Highsmith and Caleb Martin. You're gonna have to replace those guys, and it's gonna be really difficult. So using one of those bigger salaries and breaking it up into 2 or 3 different players could be a way to at least come close to doing that. I hear you on Milwaukee. Bobby Portis wouldn't be the guy I'm looking at. I would be looking at Brook Lopez. I know he's 33, 34 years old. He's only getting older, but I mean, what's the window of this roster? It's a year, right? Probably 1-2 years, depending on the Jimmy Butler extension. So go get him, right? He's a guy that obviously could shoot threes and protect the rim and stuff. He fits with Bam Adebayo. You could get Brook Lopez in there, move Bam to the 4, and still create some extra size and some additional shooting. Question is, like, would the Bucks do that for Tyler Hero straight up? I don't know. I guess you would have to ask Milwaukee that. Another team I would look at is Detroit. That's a team that makes a lot of sense for a guy like Tyler Hero. They have 0 shooting on the perimeter, 0 playmaking outside of Cade Cunningham. They don't seem to trust Jaden Ivey at all. What do? They need some perimeter scoring talent. Could you propose a Tyler Hero for Isaiah Stewart and one other piece kind of swap? Could you get Isaiah Stewart and Jaden Ivey from them for Tyler Hero? I think that's something that you would have to explore, create some depth and create some more versatility that way. I think there's a lot of teams that could use a guy like Tyler Hero in that 6-man role. And the Heat also will have to explore that because they're going to have to shed payroll. Because if this team does not have another superstar on it, it ain't worth what it costs. Like, it just straight up is not worth being a second apron team and one of the highest payrolls in the league for a team that was in the play-in tournament 2 years in a row. So now you're going to have some pressure being like, you know what? It doesn't make sense to have not just this payroll, but the limitations from a roster flexibility standpoint that it provides too. Like, they're going to have to maybe take a calculated step back in order to take that next step forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And once again, thank you for coming on to the show, Wes.
Yep.
And so this unrealistic offseason, once again, happened last year with Dame. And this year is going to happen the same thing with Donovan Mitchell. In my opinion, we're not getting no star. So my question to you mainly is, with the draft coming up around the corner, and you brought up recently of Haywood Highsmith and Caleb Martin, so it's going to be a two-parter. With our pick, with the Miami Heat, they've been drafting pretty solid, right? You got Tyler, you got Jaime, Jovic coming into his own. So I'm looking at this pick, and I don't think we trade it unless it's part of the deal, but I don't think they can only trade it during the draft night, I believe. So, like, is there some draft targets, if you haven't paid attention to the draft, for the Miami Heat that makes sense? I know Isaiah Collier has been brought up. A lot of people keep saying Zach Edey. I don't think that's a good fit for us. But just any targets that make sense that can improve this team because, Jaime came out his first season and helped this team right away. So do you see that? And, especially with people saying this draft is one of the weakness. I personally don't think that. I think you're going to get some players that are going to shock a lot of people. But, so just any, draft targets that's going to be coming that makes sense for the Miami Heat.
Yeah, look, I think the draft is weak when it comes to star talent and upside, but I think there's a lot of really helpful role players in this draft, which is what the Heat need. Like, you're not expecting to draft a superstar at number 15, but if you can draft your next Jaime or your next Nico, then that's a really good outcome with the 15th pick, and the 15th pick is usually a pretty good pick. So I am just sort of now carving into our draft prep. We do like a Blue Notebook series on Locked On Heat. We just did our first episode last week. We're starting, that was on big men. We're doing our guards this week. So I just this afternoon started kind of getting into the scouting reports and the film and stuff. But I do look at some people as I look at somebody like a Tristan Da Silva, senior in Colorado, not a ton of upside there, but could probably walk in and give you 8 to 10 minutes a game off the bench as a rookie. Maybe that's something there. If Devin Carter is starting to rise up draft boards, but he's a guy who, if he does fall to 15, makes some sense as a plug-and-play guard who can defend on the perimeter, handle the ball a little bit, shoot open threes. Jacoby Walter out of Baylor, knockdown three-point shooter. Jared McCain, knockdown three-point shooter. Like, when you're looking for somebody who can make an impact for a Heat team that I think is probably going to want this player to make an impact. There's something to be said about going with the upside pick at 15. I think they're going to want this player to make an impact because they're going to have to backfill a lot of this depth that's going out. So you're looking for a discernible, translatable skill from college to the NBA. Maybe it's just 3-point shooting, and that's a very valuable skill in today's NBA. Maybe it's size, and maybe they do look seriously at somebody like Zach Edey. Maybe they do look at somebody like Yves Missy out of Baylor or a Khalil Ware out of Indiana, who I think both of those guys are a little bit more projects, but are at least are providing size right away. That to me is sort of what you're looking at, like a Kaishan George out of Miami. You know that they've scouted him since he's here. Also a knockdown shooter, provides some length on the perimeter. These are the guys, if you look at their track record, they have looked for length. I have asked Pat Riley about this. Like, what are they looking for in the draft? They say length, athleticism, two-way ability. That's essentially what they're looking for. They're not looking for smallish players anymore. They look for size, functional size, because they know that that's the best way to add it is through the draft, because two-way wings with size rarely hit free agency. And I think that's what you're going to see them do is look for that two-way size. But I also think that they could seriously look at a center in this draft. Maybe not necessarily to pair with Bam Adebayo, but to kind of solve that backup center problem that's been an issue for them over the last few years. And considering that Kevin Love isn't getting any younger, they can maybe look to find a project there too.
I love it. And this is kind of the two-parter to it. You know, you keep bringing up Caleb Martin. He's going to be gone, and we appreciate everything he has done for us, of course. We just can't afford him, and we knew that after we brought in Terry Rozier. His contract is too big, right? But with Haywood Highsmith, right, but potentially losing these two guys. And I think Haywood's most likely going to be gone too, just because in the league, you brought it up, they look at players that are lengthy, 3-and-D players, and, you know, in the season, he's shown that he can shoot. In the playoffs, it kind of, you know, went down a little bit. But with those two players gone, do you think we're going to go internal, like a Jamal Cain, Alonzo Williams, our draft pick to replace these two pieces? Or you think we're going to go mainly in free agency trying to replace them with these are top of my head. I don't think it will happen, but maybe like Robert Covington or something like sort of that type of player. Because losing Caleb's obviously going to be huge, but Haywood Highsmith defensively is going to be a huge loss too. So like, where do you think we go with that or replacing those two players?
All of the above, right? It has to be all of the above. They're going to look seriously at their internal stuff, whether it's Jamal Cain, Cole Swider, Alondas Williams. Like, these are guys with size that they could bring up. I think Jamal Cain is a serious player that they will consider bringing up to the 15-man roster. They seriously considered bringing him up to the 15-man roster last year and ultimately went in a different direction. You could see the return of guys like RJ Hampton, right, who they liked but cut, you know, off that two-way contract. Like, that's that maybe they kick the tires on that again. They will look at the draft. They also have the 43rd pick in the draft that they could use to address this also. And they will have to look at minimum salary guys in free agency. I think Robert Covington does make some sense for this team. I think a guy like Chetty Osman makes a little bit of sense for this team. Alec Burks, I'm not really sure what his contract value is anymore, but if you can get him on a minimum. But it's going to be pretty much limited to minimum contracts. They will have the option to use the taxpayer mid-level exception, which is about $5 million. But you don't just use that to use that. You have to make sure that that player is worth $5 million a year, that it's worth adding that to your payroll and getting even closer to that second apron. Are you able to, and that the only way you're able to do that without going to the second apron is if Haywood and Caleb both leave, and if somebody else opts out, you probably have to waive Orlando Robinson. And you kind of start going through the gymnastics of the whole thing, and it even limits you even further. So I'm not sure. I don't think it's a sure thing that they use the TPMLE either. So you're really looking for sure at minimum contracts and the draft, and that's going to be really difficult. But that's why it's almost just that's why the answer is all of the above. It's internal guys from the Sioux Falls Skyforce, the other people that they've scouted on other G League squads, the draft, and then minimum contracts. But that's what makes this so difficult, and it's why I wouldn't rule out like a major cost-saving move. This team doesn't want to take steps back. It doesn't want to lose talent for nothing, but we've seen them have to do this before, right? Where they pay guys, Tyler Johnson, James Johnson, Dion Waiters, whoever it might be, big contracts, and then later on have to attach some draft stuff to them in order to shed those salaries. Maybe it doesn't have to get to the point of attaching draft picks, because all these players that we're talking about on bigger contracts are much better players than guys like Hassan Whiteside and Tyler Johnson were when they were trying to get rid of them. But they could do it, right? They've done it before. They just don't like to do it.
Yes. So now, Wes, do you believe in just paying players for what they've done in the past? Because don't get me wrong, like I think that Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat have extremely overachieved in terms of, Jimmy Butler has been great with what he's been given compared to like, teams that are stacked up like the Phoenix Suns and the Clippers. So with Jimmy Butler pretty much getting older, he's 35 years old. You really can't necessarily count on him to play 60 to 65 games. And then also too, he kind of obviously, load manages and doesn't really try in some games. So do you believe in giving Jimmy Butler this max deal when we already technically gave, we gave him $150 million? We brought Kyle Lowry. We've done a lot and went over for him. And he's also doing things that Braun and D Wade didn't get to do. So you know what I mean? So from the Heat standpoint, I think that they've been pretty generous. So do you think that we should pay him? How do we move forward with Jimmy Butler at such a high price?
I think I understand it from both sides. Like if you're Jimmy Butler, you walk into Pat Riley's front office and you want the 2 years, $113 million, which essentially is 1 year extra added on at $50+ million a year. He's already under contract, not this year coming up for 48.5, and then the following year for 52.5, and then this one would add another one for like 56 and replace the 52 with another 56. So he'd be making a lot of money basically, and securing his NBA future. And he's going to walk into that office and say, "All right, I just captained us through the second greatest era in Heat history, and if you don't pay me, Philadelphia will. So what are you going to do about it?" And he's going to have a point. And the Heat are going to say, well, you played 60 games last year. You really only showed up for maybe 40 of them. And then you were injured in the playoffs because we were in the play-in tournament, in part because of your lack of availability. And they'll also have a point. And I think both of these sides are at very different ends of this negotiation right now. And it's very interesting, and it's why I won't rule anything out. I think that the Heat will have to come to the table with something. I find it really difficult to believe that they're going to be able to stare Jimmy Butler in the face and say, we don't care. We don't care if you're happy. We don't care if you're upset about the extension. Just play another year. And have that work out to the point of Jimmy Butler being in a Heat uniform next year. And I do think that Jimmy Butler is still a really good player, but he's just not the same player that he used to be. But he could still be the guy who can help this team get... If you're talking about getting this team back past the Boston Celtics and all these, Jimmy Butler has to be a part of that, right? Like, even if you just swap Jimmy Butler for Donovan Mitchell straight up, which Cleveland wouldn't do, but just hypothetically, that doesn't get you closer. That maybe gets you a little bit closer just because Donovan Mitchell's a little bit more available in the regular season. You'd probably have a better seed. But I don't know that gets you materially up to the top teams in the league. So you do got to find a way to make it all work. If you can't get Donovan Mitchell, though, that's where all these things are sort of weirdly connected. If you don't get Donovan Mitchell, though, then what is your motivation to keep Jimmy Butler around? Because at that point, there is an argument to say, like, you know what? We're not going to give you the extension. We're not going to make things even harder for us to get that star player in the future by having you under a even larger, more expensive extension. If you can go get that money from Philadelphia, have at it, dude. Like, go for it. And I that's why I can't rule anything out. It's all interconnected. It's crazy how this works out. And the craziest part about it is that neither team, the Cavs or the Heat, can negotiate legally. We all know how this really works, but they can't negotiate legally with their own players these extensions until after the finals are over. So all of this stuff is going to be happening concurrently, right? So if you're the Heat, I think you try to buy in on the culture, what you've got established with Jimmy Butler, the relationship that you do have, and say, give us some time here. We're going to try to get you Donovan Mitchell. Because what you were saying before is like, yeah, they've been really generous, and Jimmy Butler didn't hold up his end of the bargain. You can argue that Miami didn't hold up their end of the bargain either. They never got that other star for him. They tried to go get KD. They tried to go get Damian Lillard. They didn't do it. They failed at that. So they didn't necessarily hold up their end of the bargain either. And so maybe there's a middle ground here is what I'm trying to get at. And maybe that's something that they can do, but we'll see. Money changes everything in the NBA, as we know.
Yes, and then when you look at Bam Adebayo, he's been great, and I think that he gets a lot of criticism when he's really the only reliable guy on the roster in terms of 20 and 10 and great defense. But then, like, once you look at the playoffs, he's exhausted. So what's an ideal four or a realistic four that can go next to Bam Adebayo that's not like a 6'5", 6'4" guy, just to help, like alleviate some of the pressure off of them?
PJ Tucker.
Oh God, Jay Crowder.
Right? Yeah. Guys like that, right? To your point, you don't want them to be smaller, but they got to be strong. They got to be strong enough to help. I mean, PJ Tucker was guarding Joel Embiid in playoff games. That guy's so strong. Now, PJ Tucker's one of one, but if you could find a guy with strength and size who could space the floor, then that's what you're looking for. Those players are really hard to come by. I don't know what it would take to pry, say, a Grant Williams out of Charlotte, and that would be really funny to watch Grant Williams and Bam Adebayo on the same team together. But that sort of player could make some sense. I would also really, I think we all kind of get into the mode of, oh, well, if you move Bam to the 4, which I know is not what you asked, but if you move Bam to the 4 and you pair him with a bigger size center, like what can you go? I already brought up Brook Lopez. People bring up Jared Allen. People bring up these other like $20 million plus players. Go get a $5 million center who could just play there for 10 minutes a night. And over the course of 82 games, that's a consistent amount of wear and tear that you're taking off of Bam Adebayo's plate. Maybe that's something that keeps him fresher. Maybe you start big, but you don't stay big all game, and you're not closing big either. And you acknowledge that it's not your best lineup, but you're doing it for the first 5 months of the year to make sure that Bam is a little bit fresher for the games that really matter in the playoffs. I think that could be an option too. I think it's probably a little bit of everything. Nikola Jovic, what he's doing at that 4 spot, if he keeps at this trajectory, that's your answer. He's the guy. You have it. But can you wait on that is the biggest question. He's 20. I don't know. If he can keep going on this direction, I think he could be a playoff ready player, a bona fide playoff ready player by next postseason. But we all that's not necessarily how development works, right? We know it's not always linear in that way, but I guess you would hope it is. But to your point, add some depth, add some insurance to this team in case that's not the case. You don't want to be relying on a 21-year-old player to be your absolute and only answer at that position. You got to add more depth there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wes.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's all we had, Wes, for this episode. So really appreciate you hopping on, of course. And I'm sure all of our followers already follow you on Locked On Heat, but do you want to let the audience know real quick where else they can find your work?
Sure. Locked On Heat, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, 5 days a week of Heat content going on strong throughout the off season. Also, my writing throughout the playoffs is over at Fansided. I have an NBA column every Friday. Real GM occasionally features at The Ringer. And then we just started a new NBA show called The Just Basketball Show, available everywhere you get your podcast 3 days a week. So thanks for letting me plug it, and thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you, Wes.
Yeah, appreciate it, my man.
Have a good one, guys.
Thanks again. Take care.